I'm Ewen Smith, and as Johnny says, I'm from ACFA, and I'm covering the lost part of this talk. Ian will have the more positive bit on found to follow this. So I think to begin with, it's possibly worth reflecting on what we actually mean by lost. Various people have different interpretations of this. I've been going for they couldn't be located, the panels have been destroyed. They might yet be found, but not where we initially expected to find them, or where they were illustrated in Canmore, for instance, or more simply, panels that have been wrongly identified. So if we take these in turns, the ones that couldn't be located, I'd like to give 3 examples. First of all, I should probably have said that it's in the nature of lost panels that you're not going to get very many photographs on this session, but I'm sure Ian will more than compensate for that. However, I'd like to start with Loch Ardinning, which is an example of imprecise locationing, and follow that with Inverloren, changing ground cover, and Bishopbriggs, where something I've euphemistically called informal removal. So first of all, Loch Ardinning, as you can see there, there's an abbreviated part of the Canmore entry. Helpfully, obviously, there's also a map demonstrating where the panel can be found. There's also mention to a glass lantern slide showing those coupling marks. Well, I've been to this site on various occasions and spent some time questioning local residents. And I have had the same level of success as Ronald Morris, as you'll see at the bottom of the screen shade there, who has visited the site on at least 3 separate occasions without any success. And that therefore leaves us only with west of Loch Ardinning to search, possibly using a piece of string, and the glass lantern slide, which admittedly makes it appear to be a panel worth finding. No luck so far, but there's a very large area that we can search. The next one would be at Inverloren, which, as you can see, once again, an abbreviated version of the Canmore entry. The full entry, which wouldn't fit on the screen, seems reasonably well detailed and photographed. And you can just see the photograph to the right of the screen there. But again, I visited the site on various occasions, and again, without luck. I suspect that, and I take a quote from the Canmore entry, with its surface level with the ground, it may now have been obscured by vegetation growth. So let's call that one gone but not forgotten. Then we move to the Bishopbriggs entry. And this is the 3rd example of the ones that I wanted to look at under this section. And basically what we have here, as you can see, and this, by the way, is the complete entry in Canmore, but basically comes down to a small flat sandstone, which was found in a sandpit by E.J. Price Jr. The person who's entered this in Canmore in 1970 was E.J. Price, I presume, Sr. Not only did I fail to find the 6-inch diameter panel, but nor could I find E.J. Price, Sr. or Jr., and insofar as I looked, I couldn't find a sandpit either. Moving on to panels which have been destroyed. I'm going to use Douglas Muir as an example, which is quite close to the Greenland site. And as you can see, there's a really quite decent description there of precisely where the panel is, or I should say more accurately, where the panel isn't, as the Archam's description includes the fact that when they visited in 1978, they could not find the panel because it had been destroyed by quarrying. It is no more, and to the best of my knowledge, there isn't a photograph or anything to go with it, far less any indication of the orientation and matters like that. Perhaps an odder example comes from the Greenland area, and I don't know if Alison Sheridan's still there, but at the time that the Greenland 1 and 2 were being sawn out of the ground, well, apparently one of the local contractors mentioned in passing that, and I quote, the ground was so boggy that in order to carry out the quarrying activities, they had to bury some of them, the panels, and indeed, I think destroyed by excavation some of the others. Okay, so moving on to my third category, lost. Might yet be found, but not what expected. For this purpose, I'd like to use the example provided by Auchna-Craig. As you can see from this slide, this full Canmore entry, and that is a full entry, is short but quite specific about location. Specific, provided you can overlook the confusion over feet and yards. A small distinction, I grant you. This information was provided to Canmore by A.S. Robertson and the landowner, Mr. Henderson. Now, Mr. Henderson and A.S. Robertson are now both dead, and I could get no further information either from them, obviously, but with regards to the sighting from anybody else either. Anne Robertson was the senior curator at the Hunterian at that time, but the stone has not been found in the Hunterian Museum. Though in fairness to them, they are currently in the process of moving their collections, their storeroom collections, to new premises at Kelvin Hall. There is some suggestion that stone may have been loaned to the NMS, but that too is still to be clarified. However, the example provided by Auchna-Craig gives rise to an associated issue surrounding the accession by museums of cup and ring mark panels into their collections. And I know that the questions of museums have come up once or twice already in this conference. Part of the problem is that the panels themselves are quite difficult to display satisfactorily. And as a consequence, although they're part of the collection, they are often consigned to museum stores, and with very few panels actually on display. I was given some generous assistance by staff at both Kelvin Grove and the Hunterian to visit the stores. However, it's not proved always possible to locate the panels in store. And indeed, doubts remain about whether the specific panel concerned was ever transferred to the museum. Work remains to be done in this area, clearly, but it's worth noting furthermore that not all the panels from West Central Scotland are necessarily in these museums. As you can see, some of them have gone to NMS in Edinburgh, but equally, not all the panels in the museums in the west of Scotland actually came from the west of Scotland. Which brings us to those panels which have been wrongly identified, the fourth and final category of my lost panels. Broadly speaking, the rock art that never was. And as this slide indicates, these are the scale of the issue is actually quite significant. ACFA split into three teams. We were about 40 or 50 strong, and the West team had considerable problems locating panels. As you can see from this entry, they had 30 panels in their area, but only 7 of those panels were authenticated as bona fide cup and ring mark panels. Clearly, there are issues here which can impact negatively on results about Scotland-wide distribution. By way of illustration of the natural and the doubtful features which make these unauthenticable, I take just one example from ACFA's South team now at Carlin Crags. If we look at the history, and again, this time it's not the full record, but it is a summation of some of the visits and so on. And if we look at the records, we can see a clear confusion, and my oxymoron is intended. In 1943, there were 30 cup marks, but over the following years, these markings varied between just 19 and none at all. Plus, these reports were punctuated with remarks suggesting, quote, the features may be authentic or merely weather-worn cavities. And that was in 1955. Quite a bit later, in 2007, there was a reference to possible cups amongst natural solution hollows and glacial striations. As is obvious from the range of comments at Canmore, doubt has already been expressed about the authenticity of these cup marks. After many visits by ACFA South team, ultimately together with Tertia Barnett, they were of the belief that these markings were all natural. So in conclusion, you will have possibly picked up that throughout this presentation, issues have arisen surrounding the original and current location of panels, their orientation before removal, and the accuracy in the identification of sculptured panels, issues which can severely skew results about Scotland-wide distribution. Some of these matters will be resolved, and I don't doubt that there are folk in the audience today who can throw light on these and similar examples, and therefore the Canmore entry can be updated eventually. It is these corrections which, in my view, are most important to a research project trying to detect any pattern in the location and orientation of all panels. In that sense, the project is strengthened, and these panel records are not so much lost as corrected. In any event, at this point, I would like to hand over to Ian Marshall to address the more positive side of the Lost and Found presentation, following which we'll be happy to try to answer any questions you may have, and indeed to take on your comments, corrections, and additions to the various definitions, their subsections, and the specific examples that you may have. In the meantime, thanks for listening. And now over to you, Ian.
I'm Ian Marshall anyway, and I think Joanna just told me I've only got about 5 minutes. So I'll try not to make it too much. I might have to cut some of it. Ewen and I agree that after the lost sites, we would try and end on a positive notes with the found sites on the basis of the much quoted phrase, the broad sunlit uplands. Well, the uplands of Renfrewshire, they are broad and they're spasmodically sunny, but we have found them to be regrettably sparse and richer, complex rock art sites. So I've chosen a light and very brief selection of about 7 sites, all in this Team 2 and Team 3 area, which we found interesting for a variety of reasons, and I'll mention them as we come to them. I had quite a jolt when Nick actually took this site, the sites and good golf course, but it was interesting because we both focused on the interesting part about these sites. These sites stand on the margins of Goodwood Golf Course, and there are a group of 3 known slabs of outcrop. Only 2 were actually cleared back. And in fact, they were actually first recorded by, I noted, Mrs. A.M. Morris, clearly the wife of the renowned R.W.B. Morris, back in 1966, which strikes me was perhaps found after a wild drive from the 3rd tee. As you can see, it has this distinctive chevron, which has come up in other things, but the ones that interested me are this it's not really a cartouche, but anyway, the nine set cup, which people have referred to. And this feature appears in both the sites, which the other site quite adjacent to it. I think Stan Beckinsale calls these things dominoes. Well, they are new to me, but they're not new now because I can see more. In fact, they just look to me like an invitation to have a tic-tac-toe game with pebbles. And quite near of it is the Goodwood Course Site 2. And again, we've got a very fine rosette here of 10 cups with a central one. We've got a smattering of cup marks in the middle. But again, we've got another of these 9 cup cribs set. So I just find these interesting. I'd like to know more about them. They don't actually appear in the scrap as a feature. And I wonder if they really actually mostly come under motifs. The Third site I would look at is called Martin's Glen. It sits on a hill behind Skelmerley. And it's got tremendous views out to Butte Cowell Point. It's a large domed erratic. It's got a very fine mica sheen on it, which comes out in the sunshine. But you might say it's a bit disappointing as there's only 5 definite cut marks. It does seem to sit actually in an archaeological landscape of some depth. Just about, I think it's right about here. We're just behind it. There's a hut circle, and actually an excavated hut circle by the discoverer of both the Roman fortlet, which is outerwards up here on the top of the ridge. He also found this little settlement of hut circles. The hut circles turned out to have palisades, quartz hammerstones, what cores. But we have come now to another of these discrepant descriptions. It was looked at in 1971, this boulder by Ronnie Morris, and he describes it as having 3 groups of 21 cups, 2 groups forming a rough plough, and a long-armed cross. Well, where are they? When you look at this, you think, well, is this really actually the same site? But I believe it definitely is. It's the only candidate, the coordinates match, and it was actually found by one of the crack ACFA teams. So there is some interest there. The fourth site I want to look at is sites which seem to be carved into the most difficult rock imaginable. This is above Fairley, first recorded in 1896. Fine views, you can see them over to the Cumbria in the background. And it's an outcrop of conglomerate fissured and studded with quartz pebbles, but it's got 6 ring cups and up to 10 definite or possible cups carved, which negotiate around the worst surfaces. As you see, you almost seem to have rings of quartz. And I wonder if they were actually chosen because they were the sighting of the cups, because they were masked areas in a way. And did the view shed demand the difficult task, or was it really the quartz pebbles that were the attraction, or both? Oh, I want to go back. Yep. The site, another one that was mentioned by Kenny was Craigston Wood, which sits above Johnston. Now, scrap record sheets, has been said, they are obviously empirical objective reports. You don't find any boxes marked atmosphere or what you're in a response to the site. This has come up actually quite interestingly in workshop too. And yet these responses it's what we and surely their original creators share. So some of the sites delight us regardless of the quality or the quantity of their features. And this is one that I particularly like. It sits in deep woodland in the west end of Gleneffer Braes, and this woodland looks quite ancient, but actually this shattered visage is bedded in secondary growth and what used to be a very deeply scarred mine and quarry working landscape. And you'll see from this image taken by Ronnie Morris 50 or 60 years ago, it's much more open. It's a magnificent great slab. We've recorded very carefully the known rock art, which sits at a very small space of it at the north end of it. There's basically 4 ring cups, a dozen or so cup marks, and there are these gutters or peckings which seem to come out. Now, I am unsure whether these are, they're certainly recorded by various visitors to the site. And they seem to be come out from the cut marks. These are the cut marks here as done by Ronnie. This is also another site like the Cochno, which Kenny mentioned. It's extensively graffitied, and we have very carefully listed all the graffiti down this side and tried to place it where it is in the cut mark. So all I wish to say about it is that Tam and Spot and Bobby and SD, we know your names. We would dearly like to be able to contact you to find out what you felt about the stone. But we're still working on this stone. There's still work to be done on it. The fifth site I'd like to go is another one that Kenny knows well about and had a quick picture of it. And this is the Clough stone, which is situated on Cathcart Castle Golf Club. Golf clubs seem to be quite a interesting place to find rock art on. It is a found site, and it lies under this parched piece of grass on the left-hand side. But it has been actually lost for 80 years, and there are current access problems. It was first reported by the antiquarian Ludovic McClellan Mann in his preferred first stop for recording new sites, which was either the Bulletin or the Daily Record. It was confirmed by Morrison Bailey when it was last seen as 3 ring cups, very faint ones and more probably lost or awaiting search. The main interest about it is the apparent clarity and the depth of carving as seen in the image. As you see from below, Ludovic's calculations established a carving date of unparalleled precision for these rock arts at 3 o'clock on March the 27th, 2983 BC. Well, we've made contact with this club, and they are quite open that we get a chance. Initial access was discussed, but that was all suspended by lockdown. I did note, we've noted a great publicity stunt, as it would be quite good to deturf it at 3 o'clock in March 2017, its 5,000th birthday. I'll finish with the fact that, well, there's nothing much known on the south side to match Greenlands or Whitehill on the north side, but I feel there are hints of similar clusters which have less survived it. And so I'm going to end at Rook and Glen Park on the south side. There's 2 recorded sites there at Dickens Bank, one at Patterson Quarry, which was found by Heather James, a lost site at Barcaple Farm, and the Cluthstone. All of these are within walking distance of each other. So at Dickens Bank, you have this large erratic right next to the old ducat from Deacon's Bank House. It's a much damaged outcrop, and you can see there's large millstones have been taken out of it. And just over behind the tree line, down by the rail line, there is quarry stones, which one of them was shown, first recorded by A.D. Lacaille in 1927. So I'll finish just to leave with this. Ewan and I would like to acknowledge the unparalleled support of the scrap team, local landowners, and all the members of ACFA who participated in this. We have found it to be a movable feast, still going on. We've got professionals, local societies coming together in a noble project. But as you see from the rather obscure quotation above, we are, like everyone else, concerned what is going to happen when station scrap is closed and the Lost and Found office disappears at the end of September. So it was very interesting to listen to workshop 2 and the views of others as to the afterlife of scrap. So thank you for your patience. If there's any questions or if there's any time left, we'd be happy to try and contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian and Ewan. Thank you very much for your presentation and all your contribution to scrap. Nick Parrish, who presented earlier, was just wondering, he says that you commented on the rosettes on the Gura golf course outcrops, and he was wondering if you noticed the depressions that he mentioned in his presentation. So just a very quick question.
Yes, he did, and yes, I was very interested in it as well. Yeah, I think he's talking about the 9-cup grid. Is that right?
Probably, yeah.
And the rosettes, yes. I sometimes wonder if these, I don't know how many of these 9-cup grids there are. I'd be very interested to find out if other people encounter them. And I wonder if they actually are a form of rosette, which is distorted.
Perhaps a discussion for the drinks later today.
Yeah. Okay.
About the rosettes there. Well, thank you very much once again.
Okay, thank you.